Welcome back. Several prominent Republicans in Georgia are railing against Donald Trump's continued promises to reveal information detailing election fraud. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp replied to a Trump social media post yesterday, writing in part this: "For nearly 3 years now, anyone with evidence of fraud has failed to come forward under oath and prove anything in a court of law. Our elections in Georgia are secure, accessible, and fair, and will continue to be as long as I am governor." Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger also put out a statement, writing this: "The most basic principles of a strong democracy and accountability and are respect for the Constitution and the rule of law. You either have it or you don't." Really strong statements from both these officials, more even than they needed to be. They wanted to prove that point. Joining us now, professor at Princeton University, our friend Eddie Glaude Jr. Eddie, great to see you. You have said to me a number of times over the years, I think with accelerated frequency, whether on air or privately, that you worry right now that the nation is being tested, that we're experiencing a series of crises, and there's an open question as to whether or not the country can rise to meet this moment. What do you think right now? Do you have faith in the American public, our public officials and voters alike, that they can?
Well, I have to have faith, John. And first of all, it's great to see you. And that was a really horrible strike zone. I have to have faith.
We agree.
I have to have faith in the American people that each generation, in some ways, we're tasked to, in some ways, secure democracy. It's a difficult moment. We have to ask ourselves, will we rise to the challenge? And I think in asking the question itself, we're priming ourselves to take on the responsibility that is before us. But we will see. We will see. It's a difficult time.
So, Eddie, are you heartened at all by these Republicans like Kemp and Raffensperger sort of going above and beyond to push back against Trump's false claims? I mean, he's, of course, provided no evidence of this voter fraud. What is your read on there? Because it does seem to me, though, they're pretty lonely voices out there among sea of Republicans.
Yeah, they are. But I think Raffensperger's point, either you believe in the rule of law and the Constitution or you don't, is precisely where we are. Hopefully more Republicans will join them, but I'm not really, how shall I put this, John? I don't really have a lot of faith that the fever dream will break. It's in some ways we have to stop coddling these folk and just simply say either you're on the side of the Constitution and rule of law or you're not, just to echo Raffensperger. I can't believe I'm echoing the former Secretary of State of Georgia at this moment.
Well, that's where we are right now. So we shouldn't lose sight of the idea of some of the regular people who've also been impacted by this, right? We've been chronicling those poll workers in Georgia who were targets of such hate and terrible racism and threats of violence because they were unfairly maligned by Trump, Giuliani, and others. And there's real concerns about elections this time around, that the state and local officials are going to have a hard time getting workers, getting volunteers to do these jobs, important, vital jobs, so central to our democracy, because of further threats of violence. Violence that, frankly, is seemingly becoming more central to our political narrative. What do you think about when you consider all this?
Well, part of the exhaustion, right, has everything to do with, is it worth risking myself, risking my family, to engage in the arduous work that democracy requires of us? And of course, part of the terror of the moment is to get everyday ordinary people to kind of make the decision not to engage, to get folk to kind of abscond their responsibility for democracy itself. We saw this happening in the 1870s and in the 1880s, Jonathan. There is historical precedent for this. But in each instance, we've bounced back. And so as people kind of weigh the cost, we have to understand that democracy hangs in the balance and it's in our hands. Whether we are afraid or not, we're going to have to step up. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves, Jonathan. Violence is always looming on the horizon, especially in this moment.
And lastly, Eddie, and it's a connected thought, there's been much said about how Donald Trump has really eroded Americans' faith in their institutions. Now, some of that started before Trump, but he has absolutely accelerated it. And it's across the spectrum, whether it's government or media or basic pieces of our society. It feels to me that erosion, that's going to be hard to regain that trust, even when Donald Trump is off the stage, whenever that might be. Do you feel like those are things that can be repaired?
Some days I do, some days I don't. It all depends on how honest we are with ourselves. We have to start telling ourselves the truth. As I said to you over and over again, You've written a book about the big lie. Well, we've told ourselves a lot of little lies that come make up the backdrop of that big lie. We're going to have to grow up. We're going to have to grow up and take responsibility for imagining our democracy anew. And that means we can't look at this moment, Jonathan, really quickly, as just simply entertainment. We can't look at it as just simply a partisan race. We have to understand that the very foundations of the polity are at stake. Will we take the responsibility requisite for our moment? That's the question. And in order to do that, we have to be honest with ourselves, it seems to me.
A true highlight for me is anytime we get to speak to a professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr., and thankfully, we will again on Morning Joe in a little bit. Thank you, my friend. We'll talk to you again in a few minutes.